Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for a new Comms Club live episode. Super excited for those of you who did join us last week. We are so sorry. There seemed to be an issue with StreamYard and LinkedIn. So we appreciate you coming back and we're excited. Scott, I'm here with Scott Ashton from Integral. Super excited to have you here, Scott. I'm so excited that you can be so flexible and come back because this is a session I think is super important for us. And yeah, so welcome. Today we're here for transforming onboarding strategies to engage and inspire new employees. Please in the chat, let us know where you're joining from. I'm here in very humid Pennsylvania. Scott, where are you joining from?
An equally humid New York City. It's been pretty rough the last few days. So
I know. And yesterday was like a crazy thunderstorm. It was like midnight and I woke up to I felt like I didn't even know where I was at, but it didn't do anything. Like it's still so hot.
yeah, it's been a rough summer.
Oh man. Well, while we're waiting for anyone to join, do you have any fun summer plans coming up?
Yeah, actually, I'm heading north to cool off, heading up to Maine for a couple of days with my wife. I'm an empty nester. My kids are out of the house, so it's just the two of us, and we're gonna
That's
go and get a little Maine beach time.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. That's awesome. I told Scott I'm going to even hotter Atlanta today. Yep, Atlanta. Great. Well, for everyone who hasn't seen me before on Comms Club Live, my name is Kelly McNamara. I'm the digital events manager here at Staffbase. So you usually see me behind the scenes. The wonderful Lauren cannot be here today, but she will be back for a new episode. Scott, can you give us a little introduction about yourself?
Sure. My name is Scott Ashton. I work for a communications agency called Integral, and I run the digital workplace practice there. I'm VP of digital workplace practice. And I've been in the space for 15, 16 years. We didn't call it digital workplaces back then. But yeah, I spent a lot of time consulting with clients, talking about digital workplace strategy, channel management, governance, kind of the whole gamut, soup to nuts. So I really enjoy the space. I think it's really important. It's one of the most important ways we're reaching employees across the organization, and I think it's really. I spent a lot of time thinking about the strategy of digital workplace and how can we leverage the channels we're using more effectively, and I really enjoy it.
Nice. Well, if our wonderful audience, if you have any questions from Scott throughout the session, please put them in the chat. We want this experience to be very open and a great conversation between us all. So we look forward, to your questions. Well, Scott, let's dive right in, right? Let's dive right in. Why do you think? I mean, we've talked about a bunch in our planning call, but let's start off with like the importance of the employee onboarding process.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about it, it's really, generally speaking, it is the first introduction to the organization after the recruiting and the actual signing of contracts and agreements and things like that have happened. This is how new employees are getting introduced to the company. And onboarding can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different companies and to a lot of different people. We think about the process of onboarding, how people are. Some of it is very tactical, right? Filling in, here in the States, filling out your health insurance and information, right? A lot of in the States, we're getting that through our employers, for the most part. But also, payroll and like all of the forms we have to fill out, right? Very tactical. But also, how are we being introduced to the culture of the organization? How are we understanding what the business strategy of the organization is? Some of that we get dribs and drabs of that frequently through the hiring process, but not really an in-depth, indoctrination into how the company works, how we collaborate, all of those things. So the onboarding process, when designed well, can really introduce a new hire to the company in a way that really smooths that landing and gets them up and running very quickly and effectively.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I know you mentioned, one of my least favorite things about onboarding is the documents. I'm sure a lot of people can agree. But I think just, like you've mentioned, it's a great window to kind of showcase like the company culture.
Mhm.
I know at Staffbase, like we have a very company culture. It's very friendly, employee centric. What's easy for the employer. And this is the first company that I've worked for where like even onboarding, like when we got, our health benefits and what to sign up for and whatever other financial things, it was so simple to read and so employee focused. It was like almost like lack of terms, like dumb it down for me. You know what I mean? And it was so nice because I've worked at other, I've worked at an attorney office where it was length and length. And I'm like, oh, like, and it just does make you show it is a great opportunity to showcase the culture. So I do love how you mentioned that. In your opinion, what are some first steps to the onboarding process that you should suggest? So like for our internal communicators on here, what do you think are some first steps that they should, consider when they're thinking of their onboarding?
Sure. I almost always start with a journey mapping exercise. And it can be very formal or it can be very informal, but really it's important to understand for your organization what are the things that have to happen, right? So again, like in the States, there's certain, and it could depend on the state in the United States that you are hiring the person, but regionally, right, there's different forms and what are all the different processes that are required to go from not an employee to an employee. But then there's also the things we want to happen, right? And I mentioned, right, we want them to learn about our culture. We want them to learn about what's important working here. Is customer service front and center? Is sales and marketing, or have we launched a new brand? And which may not be new to the new hire, but it's important for them to understand what that brand identity is about. So we want to go through that journey mapping exercise to really go through like, okay, they need to do these things and they need to learn these things. And then we want to go through that, figure out what we can automate, what we can introduce to them early, and then also where we can interject new opportunities. I really like to look at the onboarding um, process as a way to create opportunity for the employee, right? They're excited, you're excited, the hiring manager is excited getting them, into the company typically. And part of that process is teaching them, here's where you can, here's our LMS system, here's where you can go learn new things. Here's where you can go meet other people, whether it's a virtual water cooler or a real water cooler, depending on what your work environment is like. If it's frontline workers, right, that creates more challenges, but also creates more opportunities, right? When we have frontline workers who are out in the field or they're working in their, maybe it's a retail environment or whatever the case may be, right? They have a tendency to be isolated. And so we have an opportunity to introduce them to the organization and also break barriers down. It's challenging. I mean, none of it's easy, but there's so much opportunity like right from the first day
Mhm.
to get an employee thinking about more than just like the tactics of becoming an employee in the process, but also what else is out there and learning about the larger scope of the company.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love how you put that. I think, and I mean, I feel like organizations are doing this more and more, but that
Mhm.
orientation is so important, right? Like that opening up and like you said, showcasing the bigger picture of the company and like how an employer fits and whatnot. Um, so kind of going into, we're talking about as a large, obviously a large scale, but what are some effective strategies for really customizing the experience for each like new hires, like each of their goals and their needs?
Yeah, and this is where, so we talked about journey mapping. Now we start to think about personas,
Hmm.
right? We want to understand for different types of employees coming into the company, right? What are the different journeys that they're going to go through, but also what are the different things we want them to learn
Yeah.
or do, right? So I talked about a frontline worker. They may have different equipment. I mean, some of this is very tactile. They may have different equipment needs, but that's coming from IT, but also we need to make sure that they have the ways to get support for that, right? So the onboarding process beyond okay, here's your laptop, here's your mobile device, and all of those things is also, here's how you can get help with this. Here's how you can do more with it. Um, Then we have, like, you think about a manager, whether it's a people manager or, or what have you, but they have different things they need to do as well, right? There's probably different training that they need to go through. They need to understand where different HR resources might be available. So understanding the different personas helps us refine those journeys, and it helps us personalize what the onboarding process looks like. I think about, one of the tactics that we often recommend is to create a space on your intranet homepage or whatever that, it could be in Teams or Slack, right? You could have a channel in there. But if we think about the intranet for a second, when you can start to create targeted content, right? I know that this persona, so we have maybe we have a zone on our homepage that is targeted to people with a hire date less than 90 days, right? So now we have a targeted section of our homepage for all new hires, because everybody has to do these things. But then you start to personalize that and say, okay, for managers, we want to have a little corner of that is all of these special things. Maybe it's messaging, different messaging coming from leadership. Maybe it's different trainings that we will need them to go through, things like that. Same thing, like it's a frontline worker, there may be different processes that we want them to go through. And again, different messaging, different cultural components that, right? We have an organizational culture. The culture of a frontline worker is almost definitely going to be different than the culture for somebody sitting in an office, just by definition, right? They're doing different things. They're encountering employees in different ways. They're encountering our clients and customers in different ways as well.
Yeah.
So being able to create a common process, but that is also refined and personalized, really adds some significant value to both the company and to the employee, the new hire.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think, like you said, the culture of different workers is just different as well. I mean, I know there could be frontline workers who don't even know how to use, don't use their app or computer because they're so busy. So you need to be able to obviously customize that information and what is important for them to see.
Yep.
And I know for our past, like our customers that we've talked to and some of the other internal communicators I've met have mentioned that, like, you have to be very picky, right, about what communication you're putting, up front for first. And I think that even the onboarding process, you kind of still have to keep that your overall comm strategy in mind.
Yeah.
And that should be, the bigger picture of what you want for your employees and the culture, like you mentioned, from day one. That's what you need to do. That's how it all goes back to.
I would say, in addition to your comm strategy, you also want to be considering what your employee engagement strategy looks like.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So both of those things should be informing how you're building that onboarding process. So, I have clients where employee engagement is not as important. I've got some financial services clients. I'll just pick on them. But they're very, get back to your trading desk. It's very, they're very operational oriented. So, they have, an onboarding area on their intranet. Again, I'll pick on the intranet, and but it is very operational. It is very, do these things. Here's a message from the CEO, and here's how you get to work. I have a retail client. Their onboarding experience is like completely the opposite of that. It's more in line with what I was just describing, where it's recognizes where in the organization you sit. It recognizes where you are hierarchically. It's very geographic. It's much more. It's a much more warm, welcoming, and that's just their culture. They have a very collaborative, soft touch kind of culture. They're very successful, and some of that is because of their culture. And so that onboarding right from the first day, when you sit down and you go through, you sit down at the intranet and you look at all of the material there right away. In addition to all the other things that might be happening on their homepage, that onboarding section is like, welcome to the company, Scott. Here's a message from the CEO. Here's a message from the CHRO, and here's messages from other colleagues. It's not all right there. It's like some of you have to dig in to get to, but it's super easy to get at. And you really right away get an understanding of what the what's happening within the organization, what are the priorities of the organization, but also, how can I get help? Who can I talk to? Things like that. So, you need to make sure that it fits your environment.
Yeah, and I think, and it's funny because I know you mentioned your finance, clients, but that is their environment. Like if their environment is, we want to the point that's because sometimes it does work. It does all go back to like how you want to engage with your employees and like the bigger picture. Because sometimes you're like, no, they don't have a lot of time. These employees don't want a bunch of different pieces and what to
Yeah.
look. They want this, what they need to know, what they need to do up front. So I think, like you said, is just having, before you start, even having that bigger picture in mind of how you want to engage. And this kind of goes into, our next question. I want to talk about, we're talking about engaging with employees. So I want to look at like, how do you, the metrics behind that? Like,
Yeah.
what are some metrics that you use to measure the success of like your onboarding process and like knowing when to kind of change it or reevaluate it?
Yeah, there's a few different strategies for understanding what, one is you need to understand for yourself, what does success look like,
Mm,
right? So for one organization, success might look like this, and for another, it might look like that. But generally, the approaches are, I usually recommend doing regular surveys. If
mm,
For people who've gone through the program, right? So getting feedback. When we can, we like to add kind of in the moment feedback opportunities. So, there's some platforms that allow for, how do you feel about this? Thumbs up, thumbs down, things like that. So,
yeah.
using all of the different measurement tools that we would traditionally see in a digital workplace, some of it's just page views, right? So looking at the content that we've funneled into the onboarding experience. And something we haven't touched on is talking about like, how that lives past the onboarding. I mean, we'll talk about it in a second, but understanding, where that traffic's coming from. Are we seeing traffic coming from like that onboarding zone I talked about on the intranet, or if we create some onboarding channel in Teams or some other platform? How are people coming to the content we're creating? Are they consuming it? Are they
Yeah.
engaging with it? Are they leaving comments? Are they sharing it, liking it? All of the typical engagement measurements, but looking at it through that lens of the effectiveness of this specific program. It's really
Yeah.
important. All of the things we're talking about are not from a dollar perspective, but from a time commitment perspective.
Mhm.
They're high investment, right? It takes a lot to put one of these programs together well. Even if it's a basic program, there's a lot of thought cycle that goes into, what do we want? What messaging do we want to deliver? And so if we're going to spend all of that time and in some instances money, we need to make sure that we're getting the return on that. So measurement is critical. We really need to make sure that, whatever we're putting out there is resonating with the employees. We want to make sure that their onboarding experience is actually what we want it to be.
No, I agree, and I think another thing to add to that is, like, even just how much you are communicating with those new employees and how you're sending that information out.
Yeah.
Is it looking at the click-through rates of emails? Is it working if you're sending an email, for each HR notification or each onboarding notification? Is it more, sufficient and efficient to do it on a website or your landing page or whatever you might have? So I know, and we've discussed, all these things and how metrics really is kind of like the bread and butter. Like, what is this worth it?
Yeah.
And I love how you mentioned kind of even the surveys and the follow-ups with employees, because I think even after, the onboarding process ends, you still should touch base and just to figure out kind of how you should move forward in the future, right? Everything always changes, employees change, companies change, our culture changes.
Yes.
So just checking in, and this kind of leads me to, my own question is, what do you think the onboarding process, I want to say, shouldn't end, but like when it does end or when that 30 days or 90 days is up, like how do you think you should kind of follow up with all that information to those employees?
Yeah, I usually recommend that there should be some onboarding site or community, or again,
Mhm.
there should be some place, some repository
Yeah.
where at least some of this material continues to live, and probably is the primary place where it lives. Again, going back to the intranet, if we think about like a zone on your homepage that is the onboarding zone, most of that's going to be pointing to content further into the site. Having that all in one place, or predominantly in one place,
Mhm.
is useful for a few different reasons. One is, let's call it 90 days. On the 91st day, it's not like you're suddenly magic employee, right? Like your
Yeah.
learning about the organization hasn't suddenly stopped, at least not in your own head most of the time. So having some place where all of that lives on, that's still relatively easy to get to, whether it's in your HR site or your com site, wherever it is. Usually, I usually see them in the HR site, where those, we'll call them now, young employees, can go back. And I remember,
Yeah.
when I was going through my onboarding, when I needed to find X, it was right there on my homepage, and I was in the onboarding site or section of the home. So having that still there as a reference point is really valuable. And just having it not go away, because
Yeah.
realistically, those onboarding sections of your let's say your HR site really have very valuable resources. You're probably linking off to places in the IT department for, here's how you get help for your laptop or your mobile device. Here's where you do benefits things, or find benefits information. Here's where you find our strategy. Here's our mission and vision for the future.
Mhm.
If you're a senior leader and you're needing to look for those things, again, thinking about you're a newer employee where you're still kind of like bringing those into yourself, having all of that in one place that lives on and is an easy reference center. Again, adding a lot of value to the employees. And that's what this is all about. It's about
Mhm.
making our new hires, our younger hires, the best employees they can be. I
No,
think.
I couldn't agree more. I think, I mean, I'm the kind of employee that when they get hired, like you're overwhelmed, right? You're trying to, number one, I want to figure out what I need to do at my job, who do I need to meet, how I can make myself successful. But you have all this information. It's not just health benefits. It's, if you get reimbursed for commuting or what, all these little things.
Mhm.
So I know at Staffbase, we have, on our site, on our HR little tab in our website, it's so clear. I went back to it last week. I was like, wait, I didn't know I had like some benefits to go to like health classes. Like, let me look at that. Like, it's all there and it's so clearly labeled. And I think it goes back to what you're saying is if you have the company, engagement piece and the strategy up front, it's so easy to lay it out where you're always thinking about your employees and how they're engaging with the content, whether that be a new employee, an older employee, employee's been there for 2 years who wants to go back and figure things out. And figure out what your culture is. So if your culture is someone that like they want to post updates and keep everyone kind of, keeping a warm kind of what you said, a warm culture,
Mhm.
having apps for that or having, emojis, but making it fun and pointing to the direction of what you need. I think that's so important. And I love how you mentioned like it shouldn't go away, it should live somewhere.
Yeah.
And it should be and let employees know that it's there and give different aspects of where they can find it.
One of my favorite onboarding stories is from a year or two ago, but where we had created a really nice, sophisticated onboarding section on this company's homepage.
Mhm.
And they previously didn't have really any kind of strong onboarding. They didn't have a site, or it was very haphazard, and more about emails and things like that. And the leader in comms that I was working with told me this story about a relatively new hire talking to somebody who had been there for like 10 plus years, like was looking for something. And they're like, oh, I just saw that in the onboarding site, and brought that person who had been there for 10 plus years to the onboarding site. And they were like, oh my God, look at all these resources I've been looking for. And so, that spoke to some other challenges with their digital workplace, but that we were working on, but
Yeah.
hadn't been repaired yet. But really, like, you created this really important, valuable resource that anybody, it's the value of that onboarding site really went much further than just new hires.
No, it does. And I think, you're seeing such a shift in the digital workplace becoming such a component to employees. I mean, I know when I started my career, dating myself, but 10 years ago, like everything was in a book. Like everything was in a book. Like my health benefits were in a packet. Like I had email. Like now there's apps for everything. I can look on my phone and kind of like have that experience where it's so easy for me to navigate. So that is so funny. I know employees, I'm one of those employees who like will work somewhere for 5 years and be like, this is here. Well, okay.
Right.
No, and Zane, I love your question, or your comment about trying to get an example of the onboarding resource staged in Staffbase. I can get an example and either post it to the comments here or direct message you. So please, if anybody else would, like kind of a resource, just comment on this channel. But yeah, we have 5 minutes for any questions that come in. I guess my question, Scott, for you while we're waiting for our audience, if they have any, is how do you think, I know we mentioned the culture and engagement, but how do you think storytelling could kind of weave itself into the onboarding process?
Yeah, I mean, I generally like to the most effective onboarding processes I've seen are where comms is partnering with HR.
Mm,
And what I like to see, or what I often see, is where the communications and editorial strategy that's driving internal comms and the news and announcement kind of editorial approach, kind of holistically, is also being used to drive the content in that new hire zone.
yeah.
Where I mentioned messaging from the CEO or messaging from the CHRO. Those should be in line with the communication strategy as well, right? If again, if we've got an employee value proposition that we've launched recently, or other comms or HR business strategies that are permeating the organization and informing our comm strategy, we want to build those into, we talk about storytelling. How are we what is the content that we're putting into that onboarding zone? Are we whether we're reusing content that we've used in other places? Might have just been a internal comm story that went out last week or last month or whatever, or if it's purpose driven storytelling, right, where we're generating content. Maybe other folks are telling their story about becoming a new hire. I've seen that used a number of times. It's like, welcome to the company. This was my journey, right? I'm like you. I started last year and I had a great experience, and this is why. That storytelling personalizes, again, we keep going back to personalization. It makes it about the new hire. It makes a connection between that new hire and this person telling the story. It's really, really valuable and powerful.
No, I couldn't agree more. And especially, I think, I mean, I can only speak for myself with this, but even with remote workers, like I work Staffbase, we're very global. We have offices in Germany, in London, here, Australia. Like, so it's a weird sensation to like have to just Slack somebody you don't know and be like, hey, I need help on help me. So I think that is so important when you think of that in the onboarding, is to kind of introduce, new hires to everyone, use that storytelling aspect, where they came from or what they're bringing or what their favorite movie is or something, to build that connection where you don't have, the lunchroom chats in person anymore. So I think that's super important. No, I love that piece. For those of you, I know we're coming almost at time. Sarah is going to link in the chat Scott's bio from Integral. I said it right this time. And so if you want to check that out, you can check out more about Integral and what they do. And also we have a webinar coming up if you want to know more about kind of what Staffbase does for, for their onboarding, and a little bit about more of how to engage with your employees. Join us July 31st for Revolutionizing Employee Engagement Beyond Social Networks, where our, IC experts will kind of talk about how you can engage and reach all employees, whether that be frontline, hybrid, remote. So yeah, learn strategies that way. I do see we have a question from Dr. Greg Blackburn, which we can answer. So what role does technology play in streamlining the onboarding process? are there specific tools or platforms you find particularly effective?
Yeah, so I mean, I mentioned the intranet a number of times. I
Mhm.
personally, I think it's the most effective platform.
Yeah.
Um, I've worked with organizations where they've leveraged Teams or Slack or other collaboration tools. I had one client who was trying to use Yammer a little bit to be engaged. Um, so it really depends on the platform. You can use any platform, right? I mean, I think the best platform for this is typically your intranet, because you can usually do targeting and personalization. You have a really strong ability to host content in other parts of the intranet that you can point to, and it's a much more engaging and dynamic platform. But honestly, like, whatever is the primary communication channel for your organization is probably the right channel to be using.
Mm.
From a just real super technical, tactical, I like to see where we can deploy workflow tools, Power Automate, or, again, depending on, what process flow tools are available in your organization. But that's really tactical. Like, that's fill out this form and that gets processed over there, and then now here's the next form and things like that. That's not really about the employee engagement component of this, and the cultural indoctrination, which is not a great word, but it's really the right word. And that, again, like, I think that leveraging your intranet where you can, I mean, even if it's SharePoint, right? Like, I hate to say,
Yeah.
like, even if, but if SharePoint is your intranet, there are ways to do it. If Staffbase is your intranet, there are ways to do it. From the most sophisticated intranet to the most basic intranet, there are a lot of ways that you can take, you can make graphically engaging, content engaging approaches to welcoming new employees to the organization. Hopefully that answers your question, or at least, like, at some level, answers your question.
Yeah, I kind of agree, Scott. I think I know for us, our internet is, our site is probably what everything goes back to, like where you can find all information. But we also use Slacks to, like, say there's a notification, there's a new post in our check out the app, our apps or emails.
Yeah.
So I think having a lot of different, yeah, I think having a lot of different, I guess, ways to communicate and then kind of go back to the central hub is super important. So you're reaching all your employees, whether it be email, app, Slack. That's just my experience.
Yeah, and I kind of think of it like, the intranet is kind of like home base.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
use the other channels, right? Whether that's email or your collaboration tools to, give point to and
Mhm.
notifications about other things. But I had one client that did a really nice job on Teams. They had a new hire team. They hired in cohorts. So
Okay.
they would bring in 10, 15, 20 people at a time, like on a given Monday. So the cohort would get added to this team, and they would be in the team for 60 days. And I think they had channels for each cohort. So they might have, 4 or 5 or 6 cohorts at a time. So that was a really nice way for these very disparate, right? Some people were in California, some people were in New York, and it was a U.S. based firm, and but so they were both leveraging their intranet, but they were really getting some creative use out of Teams, and you can do
Yeah.
the same thing in Slack to create connections
Yeah.
for these new hires where there might not have been before.
No, that's great. Well, it looks like we are out of time. If you have any questions, please connect with Scott on LinkedIn. You can connect with myself on LinkedIn. Follow Staffbase to keep up with any, of our upcoming Comms Club Live episodes. But we're happy to answer any questions post event. So, Scott, thank you so much, and again, thank you for, joining us last minute, I guess, or rescheduling. We're so happy the session was great, and we've really enjoyed having you on.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And yeah, like, if there's any questions, I'm happy to do some follow up.
Perfect. Thanks, Scott. Bye, everyone.
Cheers.